Hello and welcome to Alyssa Jean's reviews, and welcome to my modern Star Trek top 25. And so, by modern Trek, I mean every Star Trek show from 2017 onwards. So, the Alex Kurtzman era, if you will. In case you're watching this in the future, I am recording this in November 2023. So, the seasons of Modern Trek that are included in this video are Star Trek Discovery up through season 4. Season 5 has not yet started streaming as I am recording this. Star Trek Picard, all 3 of its seasons. Star Trek Lower Decks up through season 4. Star Trek Strange New Worlds up through season 2. And Star Trek Prodigy up through season 1. All 20 episodes of the first season, but not yet the second season. So that's what I will be considering for this video. Now, I'm calling this a Modern Trek Top 25. However, I'm doing a lot more than just my top 25. I am shutting down operations or slowing down operations on my channel pretty soon. And this is the only Modern Trek video that I'm going to do. So I'm going to do full coverage, not just the top 25, but also I will start off with my least favorite 5 of my least favorite episodes in modern Star Trek. And then I will do a whole bunch of honorable mentions going through all of those shows that I just mentioned. So each show will have some honorable mentions. And then I'll get into my top 25. I realize that this is going to be a long video, so to help ease things a little bit, I am going to put timestamps in the description below. So if you only want to watch pieces of this video or you want to watch a little bit at a time, don't know what happened there. I just did a Peter Brady time. I'm sorry. If you only want to watch it a little bit at a time, then you can use the timestamps. Now, one last thing I should warn you about before we get going is that I am assuming that anyone who watches this entire video has watched all of Modern Trek, all of those shows, all of those seasons of shows that I just mentioned. I have no intention to pussyfoot around spoilers just because you haven't been bothered to watch Picard season 3 in the last 8 months. So I am going full spoilers on everything. However, if you have not watched all of Modern Trek and only bits and pieces of it, you have options. One option is you could just be spoiled. If you, for example, have no intention of ever watching Star Trek Prodigy and it comes up and you don't care if you're spoiled, that's fine. The other option is that when an episode comes up that you haven't seen, you can skip past it because I will be using visuals. You will see the name of the episode on the screen. So if it's something you don't want to be spoiled on, you can skip past it. You can do it the old-fashioned way by like fast forwarding through it, or use those timestamps that I mentioned earlier. So let's say number 22 is a spoiler for you and you don't want to watch my number 22. Hit pause, go down to the timestamp for number 21, and boom, there you go. So if you haven't watched all Modern Trek, you have options. But I am not holding back from spoilers because I have seen it all. So, and I do want to talk about these episodes in full spoiler mode. Okay, so let's get started first with my 5 least favorite episodes of Modern Trek. Okay, let's get into my 5 least favorite episodes, going in reverse order from number 5 to number 1. And in case you're wondering about my little name card there, it is meant to be kind of a paraphrase of Mariner from season 4 of Lower Decks when she goes, "This guy sucks," talking about spoiler. Actually, I already said I'm spoiling everything. So Nick Locarno. That's what this is. These episodes suck. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with my number 5 of my least favorite episodes, and that is charades from Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. Now, I know this is an episode that a lot of people seem to like, but maybe it's because I watched a lot of sitcoms in the 80s and 70s, and this is just a rehash of an overused sitcom trope that I never found to be that funny to begin with, which is the asshole parent-in-law trope. I never liked the Meet the Parents movies. I never liked this trope at all, and especially when Star Trek has used it before in Deep Space Nine. I didn't like it then, not even a little bit funny. It was just obnoxious. Also obnoxious, the fact that they just changed T'Pring's character so that they could pivot from Spock and T'Pring suddenly to Spock and Nurse Chapel. And yes, I do understand that T'Pring was destined to reject Spock, but after the wonderful chemistry that the two characters had in season 1, I expected a more gradual rejection, not just let's all of a sudden change her character because we want to go in a different direction with Spock's romantic life. It smells of contrived writing, and this is not a very good episode. Now, moving on to number 4, my least favorite list, Cupid's Errant Arrow from the first season of Lower Decks, which after I did my rewatch of the first season of Lower Decks, I realized that a lot of it is not very good, and this is the low point of that first season. This one also uses overused sitcom tropes. I mentioned Peter Brady earlier. Boimler is doing another Peter Brady impression where he's trying to impress his girlfriend. And it's not just Peter Brady, but it was used in sitcoms a lot. And he already has her as a girlfriend, so there's no reason to try to impress her. So that was dumb. But the worst part about this episode is that Mariner is a really shitty friend. And I really love the Mariner and Boimler storyline as it gets developed later in the show. So I think it sucks that she's a really shitty friend here. And is just so convinced that Boimler's girlfriend is possessed by an alien or there's a virus or something like that, because there's no way loser Boimler could possibly have a girlfriend that's pretty. And I think that's fucked up. And what's really fucked up is the writers decided that Mariner was right. So yeah, this episode is fucked up and I hate it with a passion. Now moving on to my number 3. First, Contact from Star Trek Prodigy. This is actually meant to represent a group of episodes, which my number 2 is also going to do that. This is representing the entirety of the first half of Prodigy. Not the entirety, because actually there is one of them that does make my top 25. But that first half of that first season, those first 10 episodes, were very problematic for me. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were billing themselves as a show that was a kid show, but also for adult Trekkies, something that adult Trekkies could appreciate. But a lot of the episodes, and this one in particular, just take a giant dump on Star Trek canon and just seem to be assuming, oh, it's just little kids, so they're not going to care. They do. It's not just canon here. It is the little finger transporter or little finger teleporter phenomenon here, like from Game of Thrones, where characters could just go one place to the other around the corner. It appears that Delta Quadrant is around the corner from the Alpha Quadrant now after we watched Voyager and it took them 80 years to get back. There's no explanation. We do see that the protostar itself can go great distances, but how is it that that Dow was raised by a Ferengi in the Delta Quadrant? None of it makes any sense. And the fact that he was raised by a Ferengi at all is also a really bad storyline, just doesn't make sense. So this episode really kind of angered me, and none of it was nonsensical. And I walked away thinking, oh, they don't actually care about adult Trekkies here. This is just a kid's show. Fortunately, they do get better in the second half of the season. Now we move on to my number 2, which is 2 of 1 from Star Trek Picard's second season. And this episode is actually here to represent all of Star Trek Picard season 2, which was one of the worst seasons in television history, in my opinion. And this episode represents the worst of the worst. This is the episode where Picard season 2 jumped the shark, and if you're wondering why, I will tell you in song. We're running from the shadows of the night. As soon as that spotlight inexplicably goes on Girardi and the backup band inexplicably starts going along with her, Picard season 2 was doomed. Up until that point, I was still clinging to faint hope that maybe it could turn around and maybe it could be like a decent season, or at least a season that didn't terribly suck. But at this moment, I knew that the season was done for, and it does go downhill after this. But this episode in particular represents why Star Trek Picard season 2 is so bad, and I could go on and on and on about why this episode is so bad, but I don't have the time for that. Now, let's get into my number one least favorite episode of Modern Trek, and if you know my channel, you're not surprised by this. A mathematically perfect redemption from Star Trek Lower Decks, the otherwise excellent season 3. And the fact that the rest of season 3 was so good, I think, is what really makes this even worse, because this episode was episode 7 and is coming off of back-to-back really strong character episodes, both of which will be in my top 25, where we have these really heartfelt moments between our characters, very sweet moments, and great character development. So this episode comes in and responds to that by sidelining our main characters, the characters we love, for the first 20 minutes of the episode. And in its place, they put the world's most obnoxious character, a very two-dimensional character. Now, if they had carried through with the redemption that is in the goddamn title of the episode, then yes, it would have been cliche, but it would have been tolerable. But the fact that they did a misdirect and go, just kidding, all that time we spent in this episode redeeming the character wasn't really a redemption. She's just as two-dimensional and just as much as an asshole as she always was. There was no character growth whatsoever. Therefore, you've just wasted a half hour of your life. This is the absolute worst thing Lower Decks has ever done, and one of the worst things ever done in the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion. Okay, now so that's enough for the negative. Let's go ahead and move on to my honorable mentions, and I'll try to go through those very, very quickly so that we can get to my top 25. Okay, moving on to my honorable mentions, and I am going to do one or more from each of the 5 modern Trek shows. By the way, I forgot to mention not doing short treks or very short treks. You may have noticed that I don't count them, and even if I did, they wouldn't make my top 25. Anyways, going through honorable mentions through each show in the order that the show first aired. So we start with Star Trek Discovery. My first honorable mention is The Wolf Inside from the first season. This is when Tyler / Voke confronts his Mirror Universe counterpart. Then we have Unification 3 from the third season. Michael Burnham watches a holographic clip from a Star Trek The Next Generation episode featuring Leonard Nimoy, and she cries. And I did too. Next episode from Discovery, Coming Home from season 4. This is the season 4 finale, the most recent episode of Discovery as of this recording. A really satisfying wrap up to that season, and it had Stacey Abrams as president of Earth. Moving on to Star Trek Picard, first honorable mention is Remembrance, which was the series premiere, a very strong start to the first season, though it was kind of up and down from there. Next honorable mention, Et in Arcadia Ego Part 2, the finale of the first season. Now, if you're wondering why this is here, it is here for one reason and one reason only. That Data and Picard scene still gives me tears, even if it was slightly undercut by Picard season 3. Still a great scene, and that's why this is an honorable mention. Now, moving on to Lower Decks, we have No Small Parts, the season 1 finale with a wonderful cameo by Jonathan Frakes and Marita Sirtis, and a great way to end that season. Next honorable mention, The Stars at Night, the season 3 finale. You're going to notice a little bit of a pattern with 3 out of the 4 episodes from Lower Decks in my honorable mentions. I thought that was a very strong finale, despite episode 9 being lackluster. Then we move on to Tuvix, which is the very next episode in chronological order because it is the 4th season premiere. A wonderful love letter to a Voyager, which was also quite funny. And final honorable mention from Lower Decks, Old Friends, New Planets, the 4th season finale. Again, the most recent episode of a show, the most recent episode of Lower Decks. Quite enjoyed it. Does not quite make my top 25. Moving on to Star Trek Strange New Worlds. First honorable mention is the Serene Squall from season 1. And yes, I realize I like this episode more than most people, but I don't care. Next honorable mention, Ad Astra per Aspera from season 2. And this is one I don't like quite as much as other people and don't care, but I like it enough to make it an honorable mention. It's just not the greatest thing since sliced bread for me. And then finally from season 2, Lost in Translation, another one that I like more than other people. I really enjoy the Kirk and Uhura relationship in this episode. And finally, honorable mentions to Star Trek Prodigy Supernova Parts 1 and 2, the 2-part finale of season 1. Another one where I don't think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, as like other people do, because I think the plot is not that great. However, it does make an honorable mention because of the touching and emotional character moments throughout this episode and the way that it sets up season 2. All right, so there are my honorable mentions for Modern Trek. And now finally, after all this time, we can get into what this video is actually supposed to be about, which is my Modern Trek top 25. So sit back, relax, get some popcorn, and enjoy my top 25 Modern Trek episodes. Okay, let's get things kicked off with Terra Firma Parts 1 and 2 from Star Trek Discovery's 3rd season. This was a fantastic send-off to Michelle Yeoh and the Emperor Giorgio character. We had seen this character over the previous 2 seasons kind of being a fish out of water, not really fitting in with the Federation, just kind of being too harsh, too evil. And yet it was fascinating to see this character taken out of that context and put back into the context of the Mirror Universe, and you see just how much character growth has taken place, and it was really interesting to watch. And of course, Michelle Yeoh knocks it out of the park. And also, I don't care what other people think, I loved The Guardian of Forever in this episode, so this is my number 25. Moving on now to my number 24, Project Daedalus from Star Trek Discovery's 2nd season. This is one of the creepier episodes in the Star Trek franchise, as they're basically going to the haunted space station and they find this old decrepit body of this Vulcan admiral that they've been communicating with this whole time, and we realize that she was an AI projection. Very creepy, very Black Mirror-y, and oh yeah, AIs projecting humans or taking the places of humans. I wonder if that has any real-life applications. Anyway, this episode, of course, is most known for that really dramatic, emotional ending where Michael Burnham just can't pull the trigger on killing her friend Ariam, even though she needs to do it to save the galaxy. Her friend Nan ends up doing it anyways, and then we get that scene where Ariam just floats out into space. This was such a powerful episode, and that's why it's number 24 on my list. Now we move on to number 23 on my list, which is All the World's a Stage from Star Trek Prodigy. This is only one of 2 episodes from Star Trek Prodigy that make my top 25. So this is the one where our Protostar crew goes to a planet full of people doing William Shatner impersonations, and this episode brings me so much joy. This was nostalgia done correctly. Prodigy did attempt nostalgia earlier in the season, in that awful first half of the season, in an episode that I don't think really worked well. The one where they tried to pull audio from all those different characters, that didn't work. But this is nostalgia done well, and Modern Trek in general does tend to do a really good job with Trek nostalgia, and you will see many more examples of that in my top 25. But for now, we're at number 23. Now we move on to number 22, 17 Seconds from Star Trek Picard's third season. Now I'm going to pull back on my original rating of 10 out of 10 for this episode, primarily because that changeling reveal I was so excited about turned out not to be all that great by the end of the season. The changelings kind of just become a red herring by the end of it all, don't they? Also, I think I'm a little more bothered by the ending of this episode where Riker tells Picard, "You've killed us all." However, even though it's not a 10 out of 10 rating, doesn't mean that it can't be in my top 25. This still lands in the top 25 because of that wonderful chemistry between Worf and Raffi. This is the episode where Worf says, "Beheadings are on Wednesdays." Such great comedic timing from Michael Dorn. Also, the scene that you see here, a very poignant scene between Picard and Crusher where they just kind of lay it all out there. The first of two scenes like this that will appear in my top 25 from Picard Season 3. And I said in my review for All Good Things that I really felt that this was a superior scene to the scene that we do get with future Picard and future Crusher in All Good Things. So they did an excellent job here. And those are the reasons that this episode still lands in my top 25, even if I don't think quite as highly of it as I once did. Next, we have my number 21, Empathological Fallacies from Season 4 of Lower Decks. So this is the first episode that T'Lyn gets to be front and center since she joined the crew of the Cerritos. Now, in previous episodes, she did do really well playing off of our other characters with her own form of Vulcan sass. But this time, Mariner plays off of her, and I thought that dynamic worked extremely well, and T'Lyn worked extremely well as a central character, and I cannot wait to see more of this in Season 5. Also, gotta love the Beta Z women, a clear parody of Waxana Troy, but I also appreciated the misdirect that they were indeed not responsible for the crew going haywire with their emotions. Less fascination and more Sarek, which is all fine with me. And now we move on to my number 20, which we stay in Lower Decks, except now we're in the third season. So this is the least dangerous game. This was the start of that Bold Boimler storyline. And the introduction to Cratch, the vicious hunter who is very lovable and sweet and has mimosas with Captain Freeman and stops in the middle of the hunt to thank her for those mimosas. Also, I love how he gives feedback to Boimler after the hunt is over. You can't just stand there and say the hunted has become the hunter. I really want them to bring this character back as some kind of mentor figure for Boimler. If they can bring frickin' Peanut Hammer back 3 times, they should bring this guy back. This episode also has a delightful B-plot with Ransom and Mariner that does a lot of parodies off of Star Trek episodes like The Apple and Justice that work very well to complement the A-plot in this episode. So this was a sneaky good episode at the beginning of the third season of Lower Decks. Now on to my number 19 from Star Trek Discovery's second season, If Memory Serves. I had mentioned earlier that modern Trek generally does a really good job of Trek nostalgia, and this is another example of that. And it does a good job because it ties in the nostalgia to our present day characters, something that episodes like Trials and Tribulations and Flashback from Legacy Star Trek couldn't really do well. It also presents updated versions of those old nostalgic episodes, which is something that Strange New Worlds ends up doing a really great job at. But I think this is the first episode that really tapped into that. I love the update of that singing planet. I love the update of the Telosians. But also, as I mentioned, this does tie into our character stories. Very key moment for Spock and Burnham here. And of course, we get Pike having a pretty good moment as well. So if memory serves, really strong nostalgic episode in Star Trek Discovery. Now we move over to my number 18, which is also in Star Trek Discovery, but in Season 1. What's Past is Prologue. So this, to me, is a rare gem in Season 1. It is the concluding episode to the 4-episode arc that takes place entirely in the Mirror Universe, which clearly for me is the best thing about Discovery's first season. So we get the dramatic conclusion to the Lorca versus Burnham and Giorgio storyline, where we have the reveal now that Lorca is from the Mirror Universe. Personally, I loved that reveal. I thought they did a great job of setting it up. They laid the breadcrumbs for that all along the season, and I thought it worked brilliantly. I also thought it was a really good twist, and to me, this was a fantastic episode, one of the few in the first season of Discovery. Coming in at number 17, Time Amok from Star Trek Prodigy, the second of the 2 Prodigy episodes in my top 25, and the only one from that first half of the season, because, as I mentioned previously, I really did not like the first half of the season. In fact, this is the only episode in which I do like, and I like it because of, well, of course, the timey-wimey stuff that they do. I thought this was a really unique and interesting time story, how they have different parts of the ship moving in different speeds, and I love how Janeway, the hologram, can go between them. And this is the first episode where I really felt a connection to any of the characters, and that would carry forward into the second half of the season, thankfully. But prior to this, I really did not care about any of these characters. So for those reasons, Time Amok gets a place in my top 25. Now on to number 16 and my most controversial pick in my top 25, as my brother and I are pretty much the only ones who like this episode, but that's okay. My brother and I can be right and the rest of you all can be objectively wrong. No, I am kidding, of course, but I don't really understand the hate for this episode. It is a million times funnier than Charades from my least favorite episode list, and also the characters are really charming. Anson Mount is really funny, and Bruce Horak especially as Hemmer, who hasn't lost his memory, but is Hemmer trying to go around pretending to be a wizard. That is really good. It's so funny. But most importantly, this is an extraordinarily important character story for M'Benga as it finishes off his season-long arc, and I felt that Season 1 of Strange New Worlds did a great job in closing out characters' season-long arcs. And when his daughter comes back a little older and says, "Daddy, it's okay. You can move on without me," how do you not break out into tears with that? I don't understand. You guys just don't have souls, I guess. I am joking. But I do realize that I went on an island with my brother with this being in the top 25, but I don't care. It is number 16 on my list. Now moving on to my number 15, maybe a slightly more popular episode, Imposters from Star Trek Picard's third season. Now, while Picard Season 3 got accused often of nostalgia baiting, this one absolutely was not nostalgia baiting. It brought back Ro Laren for an important follow-up to Preemptive Strike, and one, quite frankly, we never actually thought we were going to get. One of my favorite scenes in the third season of Picard is when Ro Laren and Picard have that emotional showdown and they just go at each other, and then that's when they realize that neither of them are changelings, and they're like, okay, well, we know we're real now. And then they move forward from there. And I know there's some mixed feelings on her death at the end of the episode, but what else were they going to do with her in this season? I thought it was a really powerful emotional death, so I am totally okay with it. So for me, Imposters is number 15 on my top 25. At number 14 is Species 10C from Star Trek Discovery's fourth season, the penultimate episode of that season. So this is the Arrival episode. It actually makes me want to rewatch Arrival before it goes off of Netflix because that was such a good movie. This is the episode where they are trying to find ways to communicate with this alien species that is so vastly different from them that this species doesn't even really have a concept of them until they start communicating. And this idea of this language that combines mathematics with different emotions, that is unique, that is innovative, and that is so much better than what Star Trek has done for most of its existence, constantly having aliens on the other side of the galaxy having ridges on their nose or bumps on their heads or looking exactly like human beings. This is the kind of thing I've always wanted Star Trek to do, and they do it in the most Star Trekian way possible. This is one of my favorites, and in fact comes in at number 14 in my top 25. Coming in at number 13 in my top 25 is Nepenthe from Star Trek Picard's first season. This was the first reunion between Picard and any of the TNG characters. We've got Riker and Troy here, and they gave them a very interesting backstory. The fact that they had this son who passed away and they're still dealing with the aftermath of that, and their surviving daughter is still dealing with that. I found that a very interesting way to bring back these characters. And what was even more interesting to me was the change in relationship between Picard and Riker and Troy, where they no longer view him as a commanding officer, but more as an old friend, and an old friend that they feel they can be honest with. In fact, each of them are very blunt with Picard at different times, and I found that to be really interesting. Also, this was an interesting way to bring Soji into the story and deal with her learning to trust people. I loved Riker and Troy's involvement in it, and I loved it so much that this is my highest ranked Picard episode, and it is number 13 in my top 25. Now on to my number 12, The Inner Fight from Season 4 of Lower Decks. As of this recording, an extremely recent episode of Lower Decks, but one that made a huge impact on me, mainly because of that beautiful Mariner storyline and the exchange that she has with the Klingon captain from Wage-Douge, whose name I always forget, but I love their interactions here, and I love that he still wants to fight with her and she just wants to give him a big hug. Also found this to be a very satisfying way to answer the season-long question, or at least partially answer it, and show us what happened at least to the captains of all of those ships that we saw kind of disappeared all throughout the season. So there's a lot to love about this episode. Tendi gets a lot to do here, and also T'Len makes her return to the show, and I love that Vulcan sass once again. So The Inner Fight immediately coming in here and making a big impact for me, and it comes all the way up at number 12 in my top 25. Now we move on to my number 11, which is also from Lower Decks. This is from Season 3. It is Reflections. So this is the long-awaited Rutherford backstory, because I had complained about Rutherford not really getting much to do. We didn't get really a lot of his backstory through the first 2.5 seasons, but we finally get one, and it was so good. This one also actually could have been called The Inner Fight, because that kind of is what it is, and we get an interesting revelation that Rutherford used to be this kind of like punk badass, and then his memory was erased and he turned into the okie dokie Rutherford, and to have the two Rutherfords go at it was interesting enough, but what they did in the end is the most possible Lower Decks way that they could possibly do this, which was with a sweet ending of Rutherford coming on top because he has his friends and they're all together. That is so Lower Decks, and that is so sweet and so beautiful. And I absolutely love this episode so much that it is all the way up at my number 11, just outside of my top 10. All right. And so that's 25 through 11. I just wanted to touch base with you real quick before we get into my top 10. You're going to notice a domination by Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks, especially. There are 6 episodes of Lower Decks in my top 10 and 4 from Strange New Worlds. They are my 2 favorite shows. And when you consider the fact that Lower Decks has had twice as many seasons as Strange New Worlds and only has 2 more episodes in my top 10, that means I really like Strange New Worlds quite a lot. There is 1 from Discovery. Good job, Discovery, landing 1 in my top 10. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive into my top 10 modern Trek episodes.
And now, number 10.
So kicking off my top 10, at number 10, Memento Mori from the first season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. This one is known as being a great submarine type episode, and it does have that really great cat and mouse thing happening with Pike involved in a chess match with a mysterious enemy, the Gorn. But I think there's a lot more going on in that. First of all, I find the Gorn to be much scarier in this episode when we don't actually see them than they are when we do see them later in the season, and they're just kind of a cheap knockoff of the aliens from the movie Aliens. Here, their presence is ominous and ever looming. Also, this episode is our first one in Strange New Worlds that really allows Pike to show off how great of a captain he is. He's just badass. He's going around making snap decisions and really unorthodox decisions as well. And his crew goes along with him because they trust him. So you really see the trust that the crew has in each other. And this episode has some sneaky good humor, and it all has to do with the character chemistry. A lot of one-liners and quips and the characters playing off of each other. There's actually a lot of moments of humor in this episode. And this is a great character episode for Leon, who at this point is still pretty new to the Star Trek franchise because it's pretty early on in Strange New Worlds' inaugural season. And it's a really interesting look into her backstory. So there's just a lot going on in this episode. It really packs a punch, and that is why it is in my top 10.
Number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9.
Coming in at number 9, Crisis Point 2 Paradoxes from that great 3rd season of Star Trek Lower Decks. So this is the follow-up to Crisis Point, the 1st season parody of the films, which, spoiler alert, you will see later on in this countdown. But here we have the 3rd season sequel to Crisis Point, which is another parody of films. This one does a little jabs at Wrath of Khan and the cheesy graphics that are used. Rutherford declaring, "Those graphics are really cool!" and parody of Carol Marcus and things like that. And other little film parodies that aren't even from Star Trek, like The Terminator and things like that. And I love the general just kind of mocking bad movies and how the plot doesn't make any sense and the plot just changes all of a sudden. So that was all fun. But the heart of the matter is, this is a great Boimler episode. The first Crisis Point that I'll get to later was a great Mariner episode. This one is dealing with Boimler learning that his transporter clone was killed. Of course, we find out at the end he wasn't, and we still need to see him back in the show because that's a hanging thread. Anyways, he's struggling with who he is and what to do with his life, and he has this great moment at the end with George Takei. Also, the 3rd act knick-knack reveal, really fantastic. Needs some more knick-knack along with Gratch. So this episode is in my top 10 at number 9.
Number 8 is really great. Yay!
At number 8, Wage Douche from Star Trek Lower Decks Season 2. So I spoke earlier about A Mathematically Perfect Redemption, my least favorite episode, and how that episode took away from our beloved characters and replaced them with an obnoxious character. This one does take away from our beloved characters, but replaces them with new beloved characters that I immediately fell in love with, who you identify with, and who have parallels to our known characters. So one of them being that Klingon guy that I mentioned from the Inner Fight, who very much was the Klingon Boimler in this episode, who had all these designs of being captain, but had a good heart and wanted to do the right thing. And then, of course, we get the introduction of T'Lyn, who would later join the Cerritos crew. But in this episode, there were a lot of parallels between her and Mariner. In fact, it really seemed like at times that the animators were drawing her to look like Mariner, or at least that's how I saw it. And it was so masterfully done because you have a bunch of Vulcans just talking in that monotone voice, and they are, getting annoyed at T'Lyn and telling her she's out of control and she needs to calm down and all this stuff. And it's not just a joke of, the Vulcan's talking in a monotone voice, and one of them, they're saying that she's being out of control, but really she's not. She's just talking in a monotone voice. That's not what's happening at all. She really is out of control relative to Vulcans. She basically tells this dude to fuck off at the end of the episode in her own Vulcan way. And this, of course, becomes even more clear once we see T'Lyn in the context of the Cerritos in Season 4. And by the way, why did it take them until Season 4 to... I don't understand why they bring her onto the Cerritos in Season 3, but I am glad she is there now because, as I've mentioned previously, I love this character, and this is where it all started. This was a masterful episode, a genius episode, and it is number 8 in my top 10. 7 is the place. Number 7. At number 7, Tomorrow from Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. So for my money, this is one of the best time travel episodes in the franchise. Didn't make it into my top 10 time travel episode video because it didn't exist yet and I wasn't able to travel back in time and put it in there. So here it is at number 7 in my top 25 modern Trek instead. So this is not only the best Leon Noonien Singh episode, but it is one of the best character episodes in the entirety of modern Trek, and Christina Chung nails it. So it's an interesting dilemma that she finds herself in. She's struggling with her family name, her family history, and she has the opportunity to wipe that all out, and you know that it is very tempting, and Christina Chung plays it so well. But she knows she has to allow this to happen. These horrible, horrible things that happen in their history that is a stain on her family name. She has to allow it to happen so that we can get to the Federation utopia. And so she can go back and possibly meet Kirk again. So I think that's what probably puts her over the top. It's such a great scene. So speaking of Kirk, Paul Wesley's Kirk with Christina Chung as Leon Noonien Singh have such wonderful chemistry together. These characters are so good. And it was also interesting to watch Leon struggle throughout the season as she meets the Prime Universe Kirk, and for a while is not able to tell him about their experience together. So that was originally set up in this episode. So wonderful time travel, really interesting dilemma for our character, and wonderful chemistry between Kirk and Leon. So that is why Tomorrow is at number 7 in my top 25. The Devil Went Down to Georgia, number 6. At number 6, I Excretus from Star Trek Lower Decks Season 2. This is the best episode of Lower Decks for pure comedy, in my opinion. It just hits you with one hilarious parody of an old Star Trek episode after the other, and I found myself laughing hysterically throughout this entire episode. I know most people, when they think of this episode, the first thing they want to talk about is the naked time, and they'll say, naked time, and honestly, that's kind of my least favorite part about the episode. Well, okay, so Ensign Barnes and Jennifer making out in the background was pretty hot, but other than that, I think that part is way overblown. That's not even close to the greatest part of this episode. For me, give me that Mirror Universe parody any day of the week over the naked time. And when Mariner goes and visits this Western scene, it looks suspiciously like the set of the original series episode Spectre of the Gun. And don't think I didn't notice that. And then there's, of course, the Borg Queen. If you know me, you know I hate the Borg Queen, so if anyone wants to make fun of the Borg Queen, I will always be on board with that. But also, this was a part of Boimler's character journey as he journeys toward command, and he's learning to be a more confident commander so that he could one day be captain. And it was after this episode aired that I first said that they have to promote Boimler. They cannot Harry Kim his ass. And of course, in season 4, they eventually did do that, and he continues on that trajectory. But this was the episode that really took him leaps and bounds forward. So aside from being one of the funniest episodes in all of Star Trek, it also has that going for it. And so that is why it reaches all the way up to number 6 in my top 25.
Number 5.
At number 5, the lone entry from Star Trek Discovery in my top 10, But to Connect, from Discovery's 4th season. This is an episode that just has a bunch of people standing around talking and having philosophical discussions the whole time, and it's freaking amazing! This is what Star Trek is all about, actually, because the discussions they are having are very Star Trekian at their core. If only Discovery could learn from this and make more heady, cerebral episodes like this, rather than feeling compelled to do all this action-packed bullshit, and judging on the trailer for season 5, doesn't look like they have learned that lesson. However, I can still cling to this episode. This has 2 plots. I'll start with the B plot, which is when characters are standing around talking about Zora and how she has achieved consciousness and whether she's considered artificial intelligence, and whether she should be taken out of the ship per Federation regulations. And it's similar to like a Measure of the Man type of thing, but it's not really, because this isn't a trial. It's more of a discussion, and it's a really great episode for Stamets, who's the one who's most in doubt about Zora, and he gives a really great speech at the end, but more on that in a second. I want to talk about the A plot, which is when everyone from all across the Alpha Quadrant is gathered, Federation members and non-Federation members, and they have to debate on how to handle this threat, the DMA, whereas one school of thought is to find the species behind it, species 10C, and approach them peacefully, and the other perspective is to attack. And you have Book on one hand giving the speech in favor of the aggressive approach, and Michael Burnham giving the speech in favor of the peaceful approach, and they are lovers and they deeply love each other, and that comes through well on the show. And so it is so powerful that they are on opposing sides of this, and their interactions are so good. And Michael Burnham's speech is freaking amazing, and it is spliced together with Stamets' speech, and I don't always like things like that, but it works so perfectly here. This episode is actually a masterpiece. It is so good. So if this is a masterpiece and it's only number 5, where do you see my top 4? So let's go ahead and move on to that. The fantastic number 4. At number 4, Hear All, Trust Nothing from Star Trek Lower Decks Season 3. That excellent, amazing third season of Lower Decks. So if you want to think of this as a crossover episode, which I often hear this referred to as, then I would say this is the second best crossover episode in modern Trek. And if you want to think of it as a nostalgic or tribute episode, then it is the second best tribute episode in modern Trek as well. And the first best in each of those categories are both in my top 3. So those two episodes are still to come. But this one actually is really close to being my favorite in both of those categories because it is kind of a nostalgic, it's callback, it's bringing back legacy Trek actors, or at least in voice form, with Kira and Quark, of course, being played by Nana Visitor and Armin Shimmerman, and they are both really good, and Quark is just so very Quark that he hasn't changed, and I love how Kira is playing off of Shax, and that they are continuing to tell each other that they owe each other their lives, which is kind of a parody off of things that Kira has done in the past with other Bajoran resistance fighters. So that is all really great. It's also a great crossover episode if you want to look at it that way. However, honestly, what really makes this number 4 is what makes any Lower Decks episode great. It's the characters, it's the heart, it's the connection between the characters, it's the sweetness, it's the character growth. And for me, this is the ultimate in Tendi episodes. You might notice that the 4th season episode, Something Borrowed, Something Green, is not in my top 25. I tend to think that episode is a bit overrated as compared to this one, which is truly the best Tendi character episode, in my personal opinion. This is the one where she comes to terms with the fact that she has this pirating past, and that is a part of who she is, and she accepts that, and that is really beautiful. And what's more beautiful is Rutherford accepts that about her. This is so beautiful, and I think the 4th season storyline does kind of build off of that a little bit, but this is where it really starts. This is the core of her character story, so to me, this is the best Tendi story. Plus all the Deep Space Nine stuff. So, Hear All, Trust Nothing, absolutely worthy of a top 5 spot in my modern Trek top 25. Number 5. Number 3, sir. Number 3. I just had to get that Monty Python joke in one more time. Anyways, here is my number 3. Those Old Scientists from Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2. Although you could almost kind of count this as my 7th Lower Decks episode in my top 10, because it kind of is a Lower Decks episode too, although officially it is Strange New Worlds. This, of course, is the best crossover episode, which I was just referring to a minute ago. And I said the best crossover in modern Trek, but honestly, the best crossover in all of Star Trek, easily. The only one that does come close is Hear All, Trust Nothing, and it's a very close second. Anyways, the reason why this is such a great crossover is because they are able to take that sweetness, that heart from Lower Decks, and easily transfer it over into Strange New Worlds, and have the interactions between our Lower Decks characters and the Strange New Worlds characters be just as meaningful and full of heart and sweet as the interactions we see all the time on Lower Decks between those characters. And I was truly not expecting that. Sure, I was expecting some humor. I was expecting it to be funny, and I did get that. I loved all the references they continue to make. It's just as if they were in their own show. Boimler and Mariner, I'm talking about. Like how Mariner makes the reference to the Deep Space Nine episodes, the past tense, talking about apocalyptic San Francisco. And Una makes a comment to Spock. Did you notice that their references are oddly specific? Indeed, Spock says. This is so good. So good. But it's not just the comedy, as I said. It's also those heartful character interactions. Mariner getting to connect with her hero, Uhura, and having a positive impact on her. And Boimler, of all people, giving a sage, wise advice to Pike about being in the moment. And then we got the Boimler and Spock interactions as well. This is not what I was expecting. This is far beyond what I was expecting. This is truly the greatest crossover in Star Trek history, and I don't see it ever being topped. Again, if this is my number 3, wait to see my top 2, which are truly 2 of the greatest episodes in Star Trek.
2 of Hearts, number 2.
And at number 2, the original Crisis Point from the first season of Star Trek Lower Decks. Now, I will get into several reasons why I consider this to be the best episode of Lower Decks and why it is the second best episode in modern Trek. But first and foremost, the thing that puts this over the top of over all the other great Lower Decks episodes, such as Here I'll Trust Nothing, such as I Excretus, Wage Juge, and all the other ones that I've talked about, is that this was the, if you will, growing the beard episode. And by that I mean the opposite of Jump the Shark. I don't particularly love the phrase grow the beard because it's not accurate. It refers to the beginning of Star Trek Next Generation Season 2, and that's not when that show became good. However, you know what I mean. The opposite of Jumping the Shark. Actually, I think growing the beard should be the episode after this, No Small Parts, because Riker's in it. But anyways, as I alluded to earlier, this is a parody of the Star Trek films. It is a great one. It makes fun of all kinds of movie tropes. It even has our characters dodging the opening credits at the beginning. It has Rutherford making a little comment about how they can use whatever logic they want because it's a movie. I freaking love that. But again, as it is always the case in Lower Decks, it is the character story that makes the episode, and this is truly the best Mariner story, or at least the first great Mariner character story, as she is going through some things, struggling with her relationship with her mother, and as she is playing things out in the holodeck by playing the villain. And it was such a great scene to have the holodeck version of herself come and fight her. And so she is literally fighting against herself. Another inner fight, if you will. But I love Crisis Point as a title more for this particular episode. The inner fight can stay in that 4th season episode. Anyway, also great moments for Boimler. And this is really the first time Tendi gets any kind of personality, in my opinion. I really hated her for most of the first season, but this is the first one where she starts taking offense to people stereotyping her as an Orion pirate. So those little things are also thrown into this with all the other greatness from this episode, the Great Mariner story and the film parodies. So for me, this is when Lower Decks became a great show, and it is why it is number two, the second best episode of modern Trek. And now, the number one episode of modern Trek. And my number one episode in modern Star Trek is A Quality of Mercy, the first season finale of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So this is that best nostalgic or tribute episode that I was referring to earlier. Trials and Tribulations has nothing on this because Trials and Tribulations did nothing to forward the character arcs of our Deep Space Nine characters, while this was an incredible character story for Christopher Pike, but more on that in a second. Let's focus on the nostalgia for a second. So this, of course, is a recreation of the classic original series episode Balance of Terror, and it is kind of a what if episode. It reminds me of the Marvel show and comic book What If, where it's showing us what would happen if Pike had been the captain of the Enterprise during that episode instead of Kirk. And in telling this story, they do an excellent job of recreating events and sometimes even using the same camera shot and the same music, while also reinventing it and doing a fresh update on that episode rather than just trying to recreate it beat by beat. So that is superb. That is how you do nostalgia. That is how you do a tribute. But back to the character story for Pike. That's really why this is my number one, because Pike had been struggling with this knowledge of the future, that he knew he was going to end up in the BB chair, and that had been his story arc all season long, beginning in the very first season of the episode. And Strange New Worlds in general did an excellent job of serialized character stories. People say this show is episodic, but it actually does really well with through lines for character stories. And this resolution for the season-long story was far better than I could have ever possibly imagined. I never expected it to be this good. Oh, and by the way, old Christopher Pike showing up in the big red uniform, that was a nice treat as well. So A Quality of Mercy, one of the greatest episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise, in my opinion, and certainly the best episode in modern Trek. All right, everyone, thank you so much for sticking with me for my modern Star Trek top 25. Feel free to leave some respectful comments on your opinions of what you like and didn't like, because I know it'll be a lot different than mine. I realize that I have a very unique opinion on modern Trek, as does everyone, because I think opinions vary vastly with modern Trek, even more so than Legacy Trek. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please check out all of my videos on my channel, including all the Lower Decks reviews that I just did, and subscribe if you have not already, and I shall see you really soon. Goodbye.